The boardroom on the 62nd floor of Kong Tower was silent. 43 men and women in tailored suits sat frozen around the obsidian conference table, their eyes locked on the small figure standing in the doorway. The child was maybe 2 years old, wearing a yellow sundress and tiny white shoes, her curly dark hair framing a round face with wide, fearless eyes. She looked directly at Kong Si-woo, the most dangerous man in Seoul, stretched out both arms, and said it clearly, in a voice that rang like a bell through the silence. "Daddy." Si-woo's hand stopped mid-signature. His pen did not move. His jaw did not move. Nothing moved except the blood draining from the face of the woman standing behind the child, his secretary, Adiz Chinasa Obi, whose entire world had just collapsed in a single word. Stay with me, because this story will not let you go. Like, share and subscribe, and comment I stayed so I know my real ones are watching. 14 months earlier, Adiz Chinasa Obi had stepped off the subway at Gangnam Station with exactly 43,000 won in her bank account, a freshly printed resume in a manila folder, and the kind of quiet, burning determination that only people who have survived real poverty understand. She was 26 years old. Nigerian. Born in Enugu, raised between Lagos and London after her mother remarried, then transplanted to Seoul 3 years ago on a scholarship that had since expired. Her student visa had been converted to a work visa by the skin of her teeth and the grace of an immigration lawyer who owed her former professor a favor. She spoke fluent Korean, passable Japanese, and the kind of English that made British people assume she had gone to boarding school. She had not. She had learned to speak that way because people listened differently when you sounded like you belonged in rooms they wanted to keep you out of. The job listing had been simple. Executive Secretary to the Chairman of Kong Industrial Group. Fluent Korean required. Discretion mandatory. Salary generous. What the listing had not mentioned was that Kong Industrial Group was the legitimate face of one of Seoul's most powerful crime families. And that its chairman, Kong Si-woo, was not merely a businessman. He was the paksa. The doctor. A man whose reputation was built not on violence, though he was capable of it, but on an almost surgical precision in the way he dismantled anyone who stood against him. Rivals. Allies who got greedy. Government officials who forgot the terms of their arrangements. He did not raise his voice. He did not threaten. He simply made things happen, and the people who had crossed him woke up one morning to find that their bank accounts were empty, their allies had vanished, and their names had been erased from every room that mattered. He was 34 years old, sharp-jawed, with a kind of stillness that made you check the exits. He wore hand-tailored charcoal suits and kept his black hair cut short, close to the scalp. On his left wrist, visible whenever his sleeve pulled back, was a tattoo, an intricate design that wound from his wrist to just below his elbow. It was a pattern most people could not quite place, a Korean dragon intertwined with an Adinkra symbol, the Dwenaman, the ram's horns, representing humility and strength. No one in his world knew why it was there. No one asked. Adiz had noticed the tattoo in her first interview. She had noticed it because she recognized the Adinkra symbol instantly and had almost said something. Almost. But she had taught herself, long before Seoul, that the things you notice and do not mention are the things that keep you safe. She got the job. The first 3 months were unremarkable in the way that serving a powerful man is always unremarkable on the surface and exhausting underneath. Si-woo demanded precision. His schedule was planned to the quarter hour. His correspondence was handled in 3 languages. His meetings, the legitimate ones, involved corporate boards, government liaison committees, and international trade delegations. His other meetings, the ones that happened after 8 in the evening, behind soundproof doors, Adiz was not invited to. She did not ask about them. She filed the official calendars, managed his public commitments, and made sure his coffee was brewed exactly the way he wanted it, black, no sugar, the temperature of a Seoul autumn. He barely looked at her for those first 3 months. She was efficient. That was enough. He had burned through 4 secretaries in 2 years. One had leaked information to a tabloid, one had tried to seduce him for access, one had simply crumbled under the pressure, and one had disappeared under circumstances Adiz chose not to investigate. She lasted because she understood the unspoken rules. Do your job. Do not flinch. Do not ask questions about the men who sometimes waited in the private lobby with bruised knuckles and hollow eyes. Do not look at him too long. That last rule was the one she found most difficult. Not because she was attracted to him, though she would have been lying to herself if she denied it entirely. It was because his face, in unguarded moments, carried something she recognized. A loneliness so controlled, so meticulously buried beneath authority and silence, that most people would never see it. But Adiz had grown up watching her mother mask grief with composure. She knew what buried pain looked like on a face that refused to show it. She never mentioned this, either. The shift happened on a Tuesday in March, during a shareholders' dinner at the Shilla Hotel. Adiz was not supposed to attend. Her role was back office, schedules, correspondence, document management. But Siwoo's usual event coordinator had fallen ill, and the replacement had made 3 errors in the seating chart within the first hour. Siwoo had called Adiz at 6 in the evening, his voice flat and cold.
Come to the Schiller. Fix it.
Wear something appropriate. She had exactly 90 minutes. She chose a black dress she had bought at a sample sale 2 years ago, simple, fitted, ending just below the knee. She pulled her braids back into a low chignon, put on the single pair of gold earrings her mother had given her before she died, and took a taxi she could not quite afford. When she arrived, the ballroom was already filling. She slipped in through a service entrance, found the seating chart, and corrected every error within 20 minutes. She was about to leave through the same door she had entered when Siwoo appeared beside her. She had not heard him approach. She never did.
You fixed it, he said.
It was not a question.
Yes, sir. He looked at her then.
Not the efficient glance of a man acknowledging a task completed.
He looked at her.
His eyes moved from her face to the gold earrings to the way her dress fit against her collarbone, and something shifted behind his expression. Something he locked away almost instantly, but not quite fast enough. Stay for the dinner, he said. I am not on the guest list, sir.
You are now. She stayed.
During the dinner, she sat at the far end of the head table, beside a junior vice president who spent the evening trying to impress her with his knowledge of Nigerian oil exports. She answered his questions with the polite precision of someone who had learned to tolerate condescension without absorbing it. But twice during the meal, she looked up and found Siwoo watching her from across the table. Both times, his face was unreadable. Both times, he did not look away first. After the dinner, as the guests filtered out and the ballroom staff began clearing, he found her again near the service corridor. The earrings, he said. They are Yoruba gold work.
She blinked. Yes.
They were my mother's. She had good taste. He walked away before she could respond. That night, lying in her small apartment in Mapo, Adiz pressed her fingers against her temples and told herself firmly that she was not going to think about the way his voice had softened, just barely, just for a moment, when he mentioned her mother's earrings. She was not going to think about the tattoo she had glimpsed again when he reached for his glass, the Adinkra symbol dark against his wrist. She was not going to wonder why a Korean man with ties to organized crime had an African symbol of humility permanently inked into his skin. She thought about all of it anyway. April came wet and cold. The cherry blossoms along the Han River were battered by unseasonable rain, and the city moved under a low gray sky that seemed to press down on everything. Siwoo's schedule intensified. Kong Industrial Group was negotiating a port logistics deal with a shipping conglomerate based in Busan, and the meetings were contentious. The Busan Group was led by a man named Director Yoon, who had a reputation for aggressive tactics and a personal vendetta against the Kong family that predated Siwoo's leadership. Adiz managed the paperwork, the meeting logistics, the travel arrangements. She was in the office by 7 each morning and rarely left before 9 at night. She ate lunch at her desk, usually kimbap from the convenience store downstairs, and communicated with Siwoo primarily through his intercom and the encrypted messaging system the company used for sensitive correspondence. But something had changed since the Shilla dinner. Small things. He began routing documents to her personally instead of through the general administrative pool. He asked her opinion on scheduling conflicts, which he had never done before. Once, during a late evening when they were the only 2 people left on the 62nd floor, he brought her a cup of tea.
Not coffee. Tea.
Rooibos tea, which she had mentioned once, exactly once, in a conversation she did not think he had been listening to. She stared at the cup for a long time after he set it on her desk and walked back to his office without a word. There was a man named Park Jun-seo. He was Siwoo's chief of staff, his closest professional confidant and the person who managed the boundary between Kong Industrial Group's legitimate operations and its shadow activities. He was 41, polished, with a smile that arrived easily and stayed too long. He had been with the Kong family since Siwoo's father's time, and he carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who knew where every secret was buried because he had helped bury most of them. Jun-seo did not like Adiz. He did not say this directly. He was too careful for that. But Adiz felt it in the way he spoke to her. Always correct, always professional, but with an edge beneath the courtesy that suggested she was something temporary, something that would be swept aside when the time came. She noticed that he watched her interactions with Siwoo with particular attention. When Siwoo asked for her opinion in meetings, Jun-seo's smile thinned. When Siwoo handed her responsibilities that had previously belonged to Jun-seo's team, the chief of staff said nothing, but his silence had a weight to it that Adiz understood. She had seen men like him before. Men who had built their power on proximity to someone more powerful and who viewed any new person in that orbit as a threat to be assessed, contained, or eliminated. She kept her distance from Jun-seo.
She did her job. She did not complain.
But she began locking her desk drawer at night. She began checking that her computer was fully logged out before she left. She began noting, in a small leather journal she kept in her purse, the dates and times when Jun Seo appeared in parts of the building where he had no obvious reason to be. May. The rain finally stopped. Seoul exhaled into late spring, and the city softened. Siwoo called Adiz into his office on a Friday afternoon. When she entered, he was standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows, his back to her, looking out over the Gangnam skyline. His jacket was off. His sleeves were rolled to just below the elbow. The tattoo was fully visible, the dragon and the Dweneman coiling together in dark ink.
Close the door, he said. She did. Sit down.
She sat in one of the leather chairs facing his desk. He remained at the window. I need you to attend the Busan summit next week.
3 days.
You will manage all documentation and serve as my direct liaison during negotiations.
Of course, sir. He turned then.
It will mean long hours. Close quarters. Director Yoon's people will be watching everything I do and everyone near me. They will look for weaknesses.
I understand.
Do you? It was not quite a question. He studied her face with that unreadable intensity she had learned not to flinch from. They will assume things about your presence. About why you are there. She held his gaze. Let them assume. Something flickered across his mouth.
Not quite a smile.
Something warmer and more dangerous than a smile.
Good, he said.
That is all. She stood to leave. At the door she paused, her hand on the handle. Sir.
Yes.
The tattoo on your wrist. The Adinkra symbol.
Dweneman.
She did not turn around. You know what it means.
Silence.
When he spoke, his voice was lower than she had ever heard it. I know what it means. Then you know it comes with a responsibility. She left before he could respond. Her heart was hammering so loudly she was certain the entire floor could hear it. The Busan summit was held at a private resort on the coast. The Kong delegation arrived in a convoy of black sedans. Adiz rode in the second car, reviewing documents on a tablet, acutely aware that Siwoo was in the car ahead of her and that she had not spoken to him directly since the conversation about the tattoo. He had not mentioned it. He had not changed his behavior toward her. But she caught him looking at his own wrist twice during the drive, a small, unconscious gesture that told her more than any words could have. The resort was beautiful and cold.
White marble.
Glass walls overlooking the gray sea. The kind of place that was designed to impress you into submission before the first handshake. Director Yoon was already there. He was in his late 50s, heavy-set, with thick hands and small, calculating eyes. He greeted Siwoo with the effusive warmth of a man who wanted something badly and was prepared to take it by force if charm failed. He noticed Adiz immediately. Your secretary, he said, looking her up and down with the kind of assessment she had endured 1,000 times. Nigerian. Yes, Siwoo said, his voice perfectly neutral. But Adiz, standing 2 steps behind him, saw his left hand close into a fist at his side. The tattoo stretched across his knuckles. Interesting choice, Yoon said, and smiled. The first day of negotiations was brutal. Yoon's team pushed hard on port access rights. Siwoo countered with financial data that exposed the Busan Group's debt structure. Arguments erupted. Voices rose. Adiz sat in the corner of the conference room, recording minutes, organizing documents, sliding the correct file to Siwoo's hand before he asked for it. Twice, Yoon's legal counsel tried to challenge a data point, and Adiz provided the source document within seconds. The second time, Yoon looked at her with something that was no longer dismissal. It was wariness. That evening, there was a formal dinner. Adiz wore a navy dress and her mother's earrings. She sat at the far end of the table again, but this time Siwoo had placed her closer, only 4 seats away. Close enough to hear. Close enough to be seen. Halfway through the dinner, Yoon's youngest associate, a man in his late 20s with too much soju in his blood, leaned toward Adiz and said, in Korean he assumed she did not fully understand, she is pretty for an accessory. Do you think he keeps her for the office, or for after? Adiz set down her chopsticks. She looked at the young man with an expression that could have frozen the sea outside the windows. He keeps me, she said in flawless Korean, her voice carrying just far enough for the people nearby to hear, because I am the most competent person in any room I walk into. Including this one. Silence rippled down the table. The young associate's face went white. Director Yoon set his glass down slowly, his eyes moving from Adiz to Siwoo. Siwoo had not moved. But he was looking at Adiz, and for the first time in the months she had known him, his expression was not unreadable. It was something raw and immediate and impossible to name. Admiration tangled with something deeper, something that looked almost like hunger. He looked away. But not before Yoon saw it. That night, after the dinner, Adiz was walking back to her room along the resort's exterior corridor when she heard footsteps behind her.
She turned.
Siwoo was standing under the corridor light, his tie loosened, his jacket over one arm. "You should not have said that," he said.
It was true. That is not the point.
Yoon will use it.
Use what? He stepped closer.
The corridor was empty. The sea wind pressed against them, cold and salt-heavy. He will use the fact that he stopped.
His jaw tightened.
She watched the muscle work beneath his skin, watched him fight with something he did not want to say.
That you what? She asked. He looked at her.
The tattoo was visible below his rolled cuff, dark against skin turned silver by the corridor light. She could see the Dweneman clearly, the ram's horns, humility and strength, the willingness to fight and the wisdom not to. "Go to your room, Miss Obi," he said quietly. "Answer the question. Go to your room." She did not go to her room. She stood there 3 feet from him, the wind pulling at her braids, and waited. He exhaled, a sound she had never heard from him before, as though something inside his chest was cracking. "He will use the fact that I looked at you the way I should not look at anyone," he said. "Not in front of people who are looking for leverage."
The words hung between them. Neither moved.
"Then do not look at me that way," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have been trying not to," he said.
"For months."
The silence after that was the loudest thing she had ever heard. It roared with everything neither of them was willing to say. She felt the pull of him, not just physical, though that was there too, undeniable and electric, but something deeper.
A recognition.
As though some part of her had known, from the very first day, that this man's loneliness matched hers in a way that was either salvation or catastrophe. She turned and walked to her room. She did not look back. If she had, she would have seen him standing in the corridor for another 15 minutes, motionless, the wind cutting around him like water around a stone. They did not speak of it when they returned to Seoul. The Busan deal closed in Kong Industrial Group's favor. Life resumed its precise, relentless rhythm. Adiz managed the schedules.
Siwoo ran his empire.
The distance between them was professional, correct, immaculate. Except now it was a performance, and they both knew it. She noticed that he lingered at her desk longer when delivering instructions. She noticed that his voice changed when he spoke her name, not warmer exactly, but slower, as though he was tasting the syllables. She noticed that he had begun wearing his sleeves rolled more often, the tattoo always visible, as though it had become a message he no longer wanted to hide. She noticed, too, that Park Jun-seo had increased his surveillance. The chief of staff appeared in the hallway outside Siwoo's office with new frequency. He made pointed comments about professional boundaries during staff meetings, his eyes flicking toward Adiz with a precision that was not accidental. And she noticed one more thing, something that made her blood go cold. Jun-seo had been asking questions about her background. Discreet questions, routed through intermediaries, about her visa status, her family in Nigeria, her financial history. She discovered this because one of the intermediaries, a clerk in the immigration records office, happened to be married to the cousin of a woman Adiz went to church with in Itaewon. The Korean-Nigerian community in Seoul was small, and information traveled through it like current through water. Adiz said nothing to Siwoo.
Not yet.
She wrote the details in her leather journal, and she began to plan. Because there was something Park Jun-seo was looking for. And if he found it, everything, her job, her visa, her life in Seoul, would come apart.
Adiz had a daughter. Her name was Chidinma. She was 18 months old.
She had her mother's dark eyes and a laugh that could fill any room she was in. She lived with Adiz's closest friend, a Nigerian woman named Blessing, in a small apartment in Dongdaemun, 40 minutes by subway from Kong Tower. The father was a man Adiz did not speak about. A Korean man she had met during her final year of graduate school, brilliant, charming, and ultimately married, a fact he had concealed until Adiz was 4 months pregnant and had already given him her whole heart. When she confronted him, he had offered her money.
Not support. Money.
The kind of money you give someone to make them disappear. She had refused it, and he had vanished from her life with the thoroughness of a man who had done this before. She had considered going home to Nigeria. But her mother was dead, her stepfather had made it clear that an unmarried daughter with a baby was not welcome under his roof, and the scholarship network that had brought her to Seoul had quietly offered to help her find work, as long as she kept a low profile, maintained her visa, and did not become a complication. So she had done what women like her had always done.
She had survived.
She had found Blessing, who watched Chidinma during the day. She had found the job at Kong Industrial Group, which paid enough to cover rent, childcare, and the bare minimum of everything else. And she had built a wall around her daughter's existence so thick and so complete that no one in her professional life knew Chidinma was alive.
Not her colleagues.
Not the HR department, whose form she had filled out with deliberate omissions.
Not Siwoo.
This was not deception for its own sake. This was survival. A single Nigerian mother working as secretary to a man whose organization operated in shadows. The vulnerability was too great. If Jun Seo found out, he would have leverage. If Siwoo found out, she did not know what would happen, and the not knowing was worse than anything. She went to Blessing's apartment every evening after work. She held her daughter, fed her, sang to her in Igbo, and watched her sleep. Then she took the subway back to her own apartment in Mapo, alone, and lay in the dark, wondering how long she could keep two lives from colliding.
June.
The heat settled over Seoul like a hand pressed against glass. Siwoo asked her to work late one Thursday. The Busan deal had generated a cascade of subsidiary contracts that needed review. She sat in the small conference room adjacent to his office, surrounded by documents, while he worked at his desk through the open door. At 10 in the evening, he appeared in the doorway with 2 cups of rooibos tea. He set one beside her without speaking and sat down across the table. "You look tired," he said.
"I am fine."
"That is not what I said." She looked up from the contract she was reading. He was watching her with that careful, precise attention, the way he looked at problems he intended to solve. "Everyone looks tired at 10 at night, sir." "You have looked tired for weeks."
"Before 10 at night." She set down her pen.
"Is there a question in that observation?" "There is a concern." "I did not ask for your concern." "I am aware of that." He took a slow sip of tea. "You are the most competent person in any room you walk into. You told Director Yoon's associate that."
It was not a boast. It was the truth.
"And because it is the truth, I notice when something is affecting your performance." "My performance has not." "I did not say it had. I said something is affecting you. There is a difference." She held his gaze. Her chest ached with the effort of not telling him. Of sitting 3 feet from a man who noticed when she was tired, who brought her tea she had mentioned once, who carried an African symbol on his skin, and holding back the single most important fact of her life. "I have personal matters," she said carefully. "They do not interfere with my work." "I did not ask about your work, Adiz." It was the first time he had used her first name. The sound of it in his voice, low, precise, the syllables handled as though they were something fragile, broke something open in her chest that she had spent months trying to keep sealed. "You should not call me that," she whispered.
"I know," he said.
Neither of them moved.
The tea cooled between them.
The city hummed 62 stories below, indifferent and vast.
"Go home," he said finally.
"Whatever your personal matters are, they need you more than these contracts do." She gathered her things.
At the door she stopped. "Siwoo."
It was the first time she had used his given name. She heard his breath catch, a sound so small she might have imagined it.
"The tattoo," she said. "The Dwenaman. Who was it for?" A long silence.
When he spoke, his voice was rough. "Someone I was not allowed to keep."
She left. She did not ask again.
But on the subway to Blessing's apartment, pressing her forehead against the cold window, she let herself feel, just for a moment, the full weight of what was happening. She was falling in love with a man who lived in a world that would never accept her. She was hiding a child from a man who had just revealed, in 4 quiet words, that he understood loss. And somewhere behind her, in the polished corridors of Kong Tower, Park Jun-seo was getting closer to the truth. The phone call came on a Saturday morning. Adiz was at Blessing's apartment, watching Chidinma stack wooden blocks on the living room floor, when her phone buzzed with an unknown number.
"Miss Obi."
The voice was smooth, measured, instantly recognizable.
"Jun-seo.
"I apologize for disturbing your weekend."
Her blood froze.
She stood and walked to the kitchen, out of Chidinma's earshot. "How did you get this number, Mr. Park?" "You are an employee of Kong Industrial Group. Your contact information is on file." "My personal number is not."
A beat of silence.
His silence was different from Siwoo's. Siwoo's silence was restraint. Jun-seo's was calculation.
"I will get to the point," he said.
"I have been reviewing employee records as part of a routine compliance audit. Your file has some inconsistencies."
"Such as?"
"Your listed address is in Mapo. But our security team has noted that you frequently travel to Dongdaemun in the evenings."
"To a residential building."
"And you remain there for 1 to 2 hours before returning to Mapo." Her hand tightened on the phone until her fingers ached. "Are you surveilling me, Mr. Park?" "I am ensuring the security of this organization. The chairman's personal secretary has access to sensitive information. Any irregularity must be investigated." "There is no irregularity." "Then you would not object to clarifying the nature of your visits to Dongdaemun."
I visit a friend. Every night.
I have a close friend who lives there. I visit regularly. That is not a corporate matter. Another calculated pause.
Of course.
I am sure it is nothing. I simply wanted you to know that the audit is ongoing. Transparency benefits everyone, Miss Obi.
He hung up.
Adiz set the phone down on the kitchen counter and pressed both hands against the tile until her breathing steadied. When she returned to the living room, Chidinma looked up from her blocks and smiled, a wide, trusting, beautiful smile that split Adiz's heart in two.
Mama, Chidinma said, and reached for her.
Adiz picked her up and held her so tightly that the child squirmed in protest. Over Chidinma's small shoulder, she looked at Blessing, who had heard the entire conversation from the hallway. He knows, Adiz said quietly.
Or he will soon.
Blessing's face was grim. What are you going to do? Adiz did not answer. She did not have an answer. She only had the understanding, sharp and bright as a blade, that the two lives she had kept separate were about to collide, and that the collision would destroy everything she had built.
July. The heat intensified. Soul-baked.
And the tension inside Kong Tower coiled tighter with every passing day. Siwoo was under pressure from multiple directions. The Busan port deal, successfully closed, had attracted the attention of federal prosecutors who were investigating potential ties between Kong Industrial Group and organized crime. The investigation was not new, it had been simmering for years, but a new lead prosecutor, a woman named Judge Han, had taken a personal interest, and her office had begun issuing subpoenas for financial records. Siwoo handled it with his usual precision.
He brought in external counsel.
He restructured the most vulnerable subsidiaries. He met with his inner circle, men whose names Adiz knew but whose faces she had trained herself not to remember, and gave orders in a voice so calm it was almost gentle. But Adiz could see the strain. It lived in the tension of his shoulders, in the way he stood at the window for long minutes without moving, in the fact that he had begun staying in the office past midnight on nights when there was no obvious reason to. She stayed with him on those nights. Not because he asked. Because leaving felt impossible. They did not touch. They did not cross the line that both of them could feel, shimmering and electric, like the air before a storm. But the intimacy of those late nights, the shared silence, the tea, the occasional quiet conversation about nothing important, built something between them that was more dangerous than any physical contact could have been. One night in mid-July, at 11:30, she was proofreading a legal brief in the conference room when she heard his voice from the office.
Adiz. She went to the doorway.
He was sitting at his desk, his tie removed, the top two buttons of his shirt open. The tattoo was visible on his wrist and she could see the edge of another, inked across his collarbone, disappearing beneath the fabric. The same intertwining of Korean and African patterns. She had not known there was a second one. Sir. Do not call me that when we are alone.
Her pulse quickened.
What should I call you? What you called me 3 weeks ago.
She swallowed. Siwoo. He nodded once, slowly.
I need to ask you something. And I need you to tell me the truth.
All right.
Park Jun-seo has requested authorization to conduct a full background investigation on you. He says it is part of a compliance review. He presented it as routine.
He paused.
Nothing Jun-seo does is routine.
Her stomach dropped.
He asked me to approve it, Siwoo continued. I denied the request. Relief flooded her so intensely she had to grip the doorframe.
But Adiz. His voice hardened.
I denied it because I trust you. Do not make me wrong.
She met his eyes.
In them, she saw something that terrified her, not anger, not suspicion, but a ferocity of hope. He wanted her to be who he believed she was. He wanted it with a desperation that a man like him would never admit to wanting anything.
You are not wrong, she said.
He held her gaze for a long time.
Then he nodded. Go home. Get some sleep. She turned to leave. Adiz. She stopped.
Whatever it is you are carrying, and you are carrying something, I can see it, you do not have to carry it alone. She did not trust herself to speak. She walked out, rode the elevator down 62 floors, and cried in the back seat of a taxi for the entire ride home. What she did not know, what she would not discover until it was nearly too late, was that Jun-seo had not waited for authorization. He had already begun the investigation on his own. 3 weeks before requesting official approval, he had hired a private firm to look into Adiz's background. The firm had traced her movements, mapped her evening trips to Dongdaemun, and on the 4th night of surveillance, photographed her leaving Blessing's apartment building carrying a child on her hip. Jun-seo had the photographs. He had the building address. He had Blessing's name. He was, at that moment, assembling a file that would contain every detail of Adiz's secret life, The child's existence, the absent father, the omissions on her employment forms, and he was waiting for the perfect moment to present it.
Not to Siwoo. Not yet. To Director Yoon.
Because Park Jun-seo had been Yoon's man for longer than anyone knew. For 7 years, since before Siwoo took over the family's operations, Jun-seo had been feeding information to the Busan group, slowly, carefully, never enough to raise suspicion, but enough to keep Yoon one step ahead in every negotiation. Enough to erode the Kong Empire from within. Jun-seo's loyalty to the Kong family was a performance. His real loyalty was to his own survival and to the man who had promised him control of the legitimate operations once the Kong name was finally brought down. And now he had found the weapon he needed. Not a financial irregularity.
Not a data leak.
Something far more devastating, proof that the chairman's secretary, the woman the chairman was clearly hopelessly entangled with, had been hiding a child. Proof that she had falsified employment documents. Proof that could be used to discredit her, to humiliate Siwoo, and to demonstrate to the board, the prosecutors, and the public that the head of Kong Industrial Group had been compromised by a woman with secrets. Jun-seo sat in his private office, the photograph spread on his desk, and smiled the patient smile of a man who had been waiting 7 years for exactly this. August arrived and with it, the Kong Industrial Group annual gala, the most important social event on the company's calendar. 300 guests. Government officials, business leaders, media figures, and the carefully curated members of Seoul's elite. It was held at the company's private estate in Pyeongchangdong, a sprawling modern compound set into the forested hills north of the city center. Adiz spent 2 weeks coordinating the event. Every detail passed through her hands: catering, security, guest lists, transportation, audio-visual arrangements, the precise placement of flowers on every table. She worked 16-hour days and slept 5 hours a night and visited Chidinma in stolen half-hours between tasks, holding her daughter in Blessing's kitchen while reviewing seating charts on her phone. Siwoo watched her work with an intensity that had become difficult to disguise. He approved her decisions without question. He deferred to her judgment on matters that normally would have gone through Jun-seo's office. And once, when she was in the estate's grand hall supervising the placement of a sound system, he appeared beside her and said very quietly, "When this is over, we need to talk." "About what?" she asked, not looking at him, adjusting a microphone stand. "About what happens next."
She paused. Her hands stilled. Next. Between us.
The words landed like stones in still water. She felt the ripples spread through her entire body. "There is no between us," she said, but her voice betrayed her. "There has been a between us since Busan," he said. "We have been pretending otherwise because it is safer. But I am not a man who chooses safety over truth." She finally looked at him. He was standing close enough that she could see the individual lines of the tattoo on his wrist, the way the dragon's body coiled around the Dwenaman symbol like a protector.
Like a vow. "After the gala," she said.
"We will talk after the gala."
He nodded once and left.
She stood alone in the grand hall, surrounded by flowers and silence, and felt the floor shift beneath her feet. Because she knew what that conversation would require. It would require the truth.
All of it. Chidinma. The absent father.
The lies on her employment forms. Everything she had built her survival around. And she did not know if the truth would bring them closer or destroy everything.
The night of the gala. August the 23rd.
The estate was lit like a palace. Lanterns along the stone pathways, warm light spilling from every window, the gardens groomed to perfection. Cars arrived in a steady stream. Men in tuxedos and women in gowns moved through the entrance hall, their voices rising and falling in the choreographed murmur of power socializing with itself. Adiz wore a deep burgundy dress, fitted through the bodice, flowing from the waist, with a high neckline that left her collarbone bare. Her braids were swept up, held with a gold clasp. Her mother's earrings caught the light. She looked, for the first time in as long as she could remember, like a woman who belonged in the room, not because she had fought her way in, but because the room had been arranged around her. Siwoo saw her the moment she entered the reception hall. He was standing with a group of board members, a glass of champagne untouched in his hand, his charcoal suit immaculate, the tattoo visible at his wrist. His expression did not change. But his eyes, those dark, careful, devastating eyes, tracked her across the room with the focused intensity of a man watching something he had already decided was his. The evening proceeded. Speeches. Toasts. A string quartet playing in the garden. Adiz managed the flow of the event from behind the scenes, appearing in the main hall only when necessary, ensuring every transition was seamless. At 9:30, she stepped out onto the garden terrace for air. The night was warm and still. Below the terrace, the lights of northern Seoul spread out like scattered jewels. She heard the terrace door open behind her. She did not turn around. She did not need to. "You are supposed to be inside," she said. I am supposed to be in many places I have no interest in being, Siwoo said, stepping beside her at the railing. I would rather be here. Your guests will survive without me for 5 minutes. They stood together in silence. The string quartet's music drifted up from the garden below, something slow and aching, a piece she did not recognize but that seemed to match the rhythm of her heartbeat.
After tonight, she said.
You said we would talk.
Yes.
There are things I need to tell you. Things that will change how you see me.
He was quiet for a moment.
Nothing will change how I see you. You cannot promise that.
I can. He turned to face her.
I have seen you. Not the version you show the office. Not the competence or the composure. I have seen the woman underneath, the one who holds everything together by sheer will and refuses to let anyone close enough to help.
I see her.
And nothing you tell me will make me unsee her.
Her eyes burned.
She blinked hard, refusing to let the tears fall.
Not here.
Not in front of 300 guests and the staff and the security cameras. You do not know what you are saying, she whispered. I know exactly what I am saying. He reached out and for the first time touched her. His fingers closed around her wrist, gently, precisely, the way you hold something you are afraid of breaking. His thumb rested against her pulse. Your heart is racing, he said.
I know. So is mine.
They stood like that for a long moment, his hand on her wrist, her pulse hammering against his thumb, the city glowing beneath them and the music rising from the garden like a prayer. Then the terrace door opened again, and they separated instantly, a practiced distance, seamless, as though they had been standing apart the whole time. It was Jun Seo. Chairman Kong, he said, his voice silk over steel. Director Yoon has arrived. He is asking for you. Si-woo's expression hardened. Yoon was not on the guest list. He was added at the last moment.
By the board.
They felt his presence would signal goodwill after the Busan negotiation. Jun Seo's eyes moved to Adiz, then back. He has brought a guest as well.
Who?
Jun Seo smiled. It was the smile of a man who had been waiting for this moment for 7 years. His guest is already inside. I believe you should see for yourself. Si-woo looked at Adiz. Something in his expression, a flicker of warning, of premonition, made her stomach clench. They walked back inside together. The reception hall was exactly as they had left it, glittering warm, alive with conversation and music. Director Yoon was standing near the center of the room, his bulk draped in an expensive suit, a champagne flute in his thick hand. He was smiling broadly at the circle of board members surrounding him. But it was not Yoon that made Adiz stop breathing. Standing beside Yoon, holding a glass of sparkling water, her face composed and beautiful and unmistakable, was Blessing. And in Blessing's arms, wearing a tiny yellow dress and blinking at the bright lights of the chandelier with wide, curious, fearless eyes, was Chidinma. Adiz's vision narrowed.
The room tilted.
Sound became muffled, as though she were hearing everything through water. Blessing's face was stricken, pale beneath her dark skin, her eyes wide and terrified, locked onto Adiz with an expression that screamed I had no choice. Behind Blessing, barely visible in the crowd, a man Adiz recognized as one of Jun Seo's security staff stood with his hand on Blessing's elbow, not guiding. Controlling. Director Yoon saw Si-woo approaching and beamed.
Chairman Kong.
What a magnificent event. I brought a special guest, I hope you do not mind. He gestured toward Blessing and Chidinma with the casual cruelty of a man presenting a piece of evidence. This lovely woman tells me she is a friend of your secretary.
And this little one.
Chidinma turned her head. She saw Adiz first, and her face lit up. Then her eyes moved, tracking the way children's eyes do, drawn to the tallest figure, the closest presence, the one who radiated the most energy. She looked at Si-woo. And the room went silent. Not all at once, but in a spreading wave, as conversation died table by table and heads turned toward the center of the hall. Because Chidinma, 18 months old, innocent of politics and power and the weight of secrets, looked at the tall man in the charcoal suit with the sharp jaw and the dark eyes, and she stretched out both arms toward him, and she said the word that would detonate everything. Daddy. The word rang through the hall like a struck bell. Si-woo froze. Completely. The glass of champagne in his hand did not move. His face did not move. His eyes, locked on the child, went wide with something that was not shock exactly, but recognition. As though he was hearing a word he had imagined but never expected to hear spoken aloud. 300 pairs of eyes stared. Phones emerged from pockets. Board members exchanged glances. Director Yoon's smile widened into something predatory and triumphant. And Adiz, standing 4 feet from the man she loved, watching her daughter reach for him with the innocent trust that children extend to the world before the world teaches them not to, felt her entire carefully constructed life collapse around her like a building made of glass. The silence lasted exactly 4 seconds. In the architecture of a crisis, 4 seconds is an eternity. Long enough for every person in that room to draw a conclusion, form a judgment, and begin composing the version of the story they would tell.
Siwoo moved first. He did not step back.
He did not look away from the child. He set his champagne glass on the nearest table with a deliberate calm that Adiz recognized. The same calm he brought to hostile negotiations, to meetings with federal prosecutors, to every situation where lesser men would have flinched.
Then he stepped forward.
He stepped forward, and he took Chidinma from Blessing's arms. The child went to him without hesitation. She curled her small fingers into the lapel of his suit and pressed her face against his shoulder, and Siwoo held her as though he had done it 1,000 times. One arm beneath her, the other across her small back, the tattoo on his wrist dark against the yellow fabric of her dress. "The evening is proceeding on schedule," he said to the room. His voice was steady, quiet, and absolute. "Please continue enjoying the gala."
He turned to Adiz.
His eyes met hers, and what she saw in them was not anger.
Not betrayal.
Not the cold fury she had expected.
It was a question.
One question, burning and silent. "Why did you not tell me?" She could not answer.
Not here.
Not with 300 people watching. Not with Director Yoon's smile spreading like poison across the room. Siwoo looked at Junseo. Something passed between the two men, a recognition that went beyond words. Siwoo understood in that instant exactly who had orchestrated this. Exactly who had brought Blessing and the child here. Exactly who had handed Yoon the weapon he needed. Junseo's smile did not waver. But his eyes flickered, a tiny involuntary movement, the first crack in his composure. Because Siwoo was not reacting the way he was supposed to. The plan, Junseo's careful, patient, 7-year plan, had been to humiliate.
To expose.
To force Siwoo into a public denial that would fracture his authority and give Yoon the opening to move against the Kong Empire. Instead, Siwoo was holding the child. "Miss Obi," Siwoo said, and his voice carried the precise authority of a man giving an order that would be obeyed.
"Come with me."
He walked toward the private corridor at the back of the hall, Chidinma on his shoulder, his stride unhurried, his posture composed.
Adiz followed.
Blessing, released from the security man's grip by a sharp glance from Siwoo, followed as well. The corridor door closed behind them. The noise of the gala became a distant murmur. The hallway was cool, dimly lit, lined with framed calligraphy. Siwoo turned to Blessing first. His voice was low but not unkind. "How did they bring you here?" Blessing was shaking. Her hands trembled at her sides. "A man came to my apartment. 3 hours ago. He said Adiz had sent him, that I was to bring the baby to the gala.
He had a car. A driver.
I did not know until I arrived and saw Director Yoon. I tried to leave and they would not let me."
Siwoo's jaw tightened. The muscle beneath his skin jumped once, twice. Chidinma, oblivious, was playing with a button on his suit jacket. "You are safe now," he said to Blessing. "No one will touch you again." He looked at Adiz. The corridor was silent. Her daughter, was in his arms, her small hand curled against his collarbone, directly over the second tattoo she had glimpsed once through an open shirt collar. The dragon and the Dweneman. The symbol of a loss he had never fully explained. "She is yours," he said. Not a question. Yes. How old? 18 months. The father. Adiz's throat closed. A man who is no longer in our lives. He left before she was born. Siwoo nodded slowly. He looked down at Chidinma, who had found the tattoo on his wrist and was tracing it with one tiny finger, fascinated by the dark lines against his skin. "She called me daddy," he said. She has been learning words. She calls many men that. Blessing's husband. The man at the grocery store. It is. Do not explain it away, he said quietly. His eyes were still on the child. Do not make it small. Adiz pressed her lips together and felt the tears she had been fighting all night finally begin to fall. "I did not hide her because I wanted to," she said, and her voice cracked on the last word. "I hid her because I had to. Because a single mother, a foreigner working for you in your world, I would have been a liability. A weakness. Something your enemies could use against you." She drew a shaking breath. "And I was right. Because that is exactly what just happened." Siwoo was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was stripped of every defense, every layer of authority and control. "You should have told me," he said. "Not because I am your employer. Because I am the man who has been falling in love with you for 5 months and had no idea that the woman I love was carrying this alone." The words hit her like a wave.
She staggered, not physically, but something inside her staggered, something structural, a wall she had built from fear and pride and the absolute conviction that she could not afford to need anyone. "You cannot love me," she whispered. "You do not even know what that means. Not in your world." "My world." He said it as though the words tasted bitter. "My world is a cage I was born into. You are the first thing in it that has ever felt like air."
Chidinma yawned.
She nestled deeper against Si-woo's shoulder. The yellow dress was wrinkled. One of her tiny shoes had fallen off somewhere in the corridor. Adiz looked at her daughter in this man's arms and felt something she had not allowed herself to feel since the day Chidinma's father had offered her money instead of love.
She felt safe.
But safety, in the world of Kong Si-woo, was always temporary. While the three of them stood in the corridor, the gala continued without its host. Director Yoon worked the room with the fluid ease of a man who had just won a hand of poker. He spoke to board members in low, confidential tones. He mentioned the child. He mentioned the secretary. He used words like compromised and judgment and liability. The same word Adiz herself had used, and he planted them like seeds in fertile soil. Jun Seo, meanwhile, had retreated to his private office on the third floor of the estate.
He was on the phone.
"It did not go as planned," he said, his voice tight.
He took the child.
He walked out with her. He did not deny anything. The voice on the other end belonged to Yoon. "That is even better than a denial," Yoon said. "A denial we would have to prove false. This is an admission." The chairman of Kong Industrial Group, holding a secret child in front of 300 witnesses. "The prosecutors will feast on this. The board will have no choice." The board moved slowly.
"Not anymore.
I will file a motion for emergency review on Monday. Grounds: the chairman's personal entanglements represent a security risk to the organization. I have 3 board members already. I need 5. "I can deliver 5, Jun Seo said. "Then deliver them."
The call ended.
Jun Seo sat in the dark office, surrounded by the framed photographs and awards that documented his decades of service to the Kong family. His face, illuminated by the blue light of his phone, showed no guilt.
No hesitation.
Only the calculating satisfaction of a man who had been invisible for too long and was finally about to step into the light. Si-woo did not return to the gala. He instructed his head of security, a taciturn man named Kwon, to manage the remainder of the evening and ensure that Yoon left the premises within the hour. Then he had a car brought to the estate's private entrance and drove Adiz, Blessing, and Chidinma to his personal residence in Hanamdong. The residence was a modernist structure of concrete and glass set behind high walls, surrounded by manicured gardens that were invisible from the street. Adiz had been there once before, to deliver documents. She had not been inside. The interior was spare, beautiful, and deeply quiet. Dark wood floors. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. A grand piano in the living room that looked like it had not been played in years. Everywhere, the controlled aesthetic of a man who had eliminated everything unnecessary from his surroundings. Except, Adiz noticed, a single framed photograph on a shelf near the window. A woman. Korean features, warm eyes, a wide smile. She was holding a baby. Adiz looked at the photograph and then at Si-woo, who had followed her gaze. His face closed. "My mother," he said. "And me. Taken 6 months before she died." "How old were you?" 2. The same age as Chidinma. Adiz felt the connection like a physical blow, the symmetry of it, the cruelty and the beauty tangled together. Si-woo set up a guest room for Blessing and a makeshift nursery in the room beside it. He produced from somewhere in the house a blanket that was softer than anything Adiz had ever touched, and he laid it in a wide armchair that he positioned against the wall so Chidinma could not roll off. He did all of this without being asked, with the careful efficiency of a man who was solving a problem. Except his hands, Adiz noticed, were trembling. When Chidinma was asleep and Blessing had retired to the guest room, Si-woo and Adiz sat in the living room. He poured 2 glasses of water. Not tea. Not alcohol. Water. As though they both needed to be completely clear for what was coming. "Tell me everything," he said. She told him. All of it. The scholarship. The graduate school relationship. The married man who disappeared. The pregnancy she had faced alone. The stepfather who had turned her away. Blessing. The job at Kong Industrial Group. The deliberate omissions on her forms. The wall she had built around Chidinma's existence to protect them both. She told it without self-pity, without apology. She told it as fact, the geography of a life shaped by necessity. When she finished, Si-woo sat in silence for a long time. His water was untouched. His hands were clasped between his knees, the tattoo dark against his interlocked fingers. "The man," he said finally. "The father. Who is he?" "It does not matter." It matters to me.
She hesitated.
His name was Lim Sang-jun. He was a professor of international trade at Yonsei.
He is still married.
He has a family. He never acknowledged Chidinma. Si-woo's expression did not change. But something shifted behind his eyes, something dangerous and cold and absolute. He will not matter anymore, Si-woo said, and the quiet certainty in his voice made the hair rise on Adi's arms. I do not want revenge, she said quickly.
I want safety. For her.
That is all I have ever wanted. You will have it. He looked at her then, fully openly, without the careful restraint he had maintained for months. His eyes were raw. You will have safety. For her and for you. I give you my word.
Your word.
She shook her head slowly. Your word means something in your world. But your world is trying to destroy me right now, Si-woo.
Yoon. Jun-seo. You're bored.
They will use this. Let them try. They will take your company. Let them try.
They will come after me. After my visa. After Chidinma. Adi's.
He reached across the space between them and took her hands. His grip was firm, steady, warm. The trembling was gone. No one will touch you.
No one will touch her.
I have spent my entire life protecting things that did not matter. Let me protect something that does.
She broke.
The composure she had held for 18 months, through single motherhood, through poverty, through the grinding daily performance of competence in a world that wanted to prove she did not belong, shattered. She wept. Not quietly. Not gracefully. She wept like a woman who had been drowning and had finally been given permission to stop swimming. Si-woo pulled her against him. He held her the way he had held Chidinma, one arm around her, the other across her back, solid and unyielding. His chin rested on the top of her head. He said nothing. He simply held her, and the silence between them was no longer restraint.
It was shelter.
The following week was a siege. On Monday, Director Yoon filed his motion with the Kong Industrial Board. On Tuesday, 3 financial news outlets ran stories about the scandal at the gala, the chairman's secretary, the mystery child, the public scene. Unnamed sources described Adiz as a foreign opportunist, and Si-woo as compromised by personal entanglements. The language was surgical, designed to inflict maximum damage without crossing into outright defamation. Si-woo traced the unnamed sources to Jun-seo within 48 hours. The digital trail was thin but present, metadata on a forwarded email, a phone record connecting Jun-seo's personal line to a journalist's office number. He did not confront Jun-seo immediately. That was not his way. He gathered the evidence, filed it, and waited. Adiz moved into the Hanamdong residence on Si-woo's insistence. Blessing and Chidinma came with her. Si-woo assigned a security detail, 2 women from his personal protection team, chosen deliberately because they would be less intimidating for the child. He had the guest rooms furnished. He had a proper crib delivered. He stocked the kitchen with a specific brand of baby food that Adiz mentioned once, that Chidinma preferred. Adiz watched him do all of this and felt a strange, disorienting vertigo, the sensation of falling into something she had spent her entire adult life believing she would never have. You are doing too much, she told him one evening, standing in the kitchen while he reviewed security protocols on his phone, and Chidinma sat on the floor at his feet, methodically removing his shoelaces. He looked down at the child, then up at Adiz. The ghost of a smile crossed his face, the first real smile she had ever seen from him, and it was so unexpected, so transformative, that it changed the entire architecture of his face. I am doing exactly enough, he said. The board meeting was scheduled for Thursday. Yoon had secured his 5 votes. The motion was to conduct a formal review of Si-woo's leadership, with a possibility of a temporary suspension pending investigation. Si-woo prepared for it the way he prepared for everything, meticulously, ruthlessly, with a tactical intelligence that reminded Adiz that beneath the tailored suits and the quiet voice, this man had built a criminal empire before he was 30. He brought 3 things to the boardroom.
The first was Adiz.
She sat beside him, not behind him, not at the far end of the table, but beside him, in the seat usually reserved for the chief of staff. She wore a black suit. Her mother's earrings. Her expression was composed, steady, and utterly unafraid. The second was a file. It contained every piece of evidence he had gathered against Park Jun-seo, the connection to Yoon, the leaked information, the unauthorized surveillance of Adiz, the private security firm hired without company approval, and the orchestrated abduction of a civilian woman and a child to a corporate event. The file was thick. It was devastating. And it had been distributed to every board member's seat before they arrived.
The third was his voice.
Ladies and gentlemen, Si-woo said, standing at the head of the obsidian table, his jacket buttoned, his posture absolute, the tattoo visible at his wrist as his hands rested on the table's surface. You have been asked to review my leadership on the grounds that my personal life represents a security risk. I am here to show you that the only security risk in this room is the man who has been betraying this company for 7 years.
He laid it out. Point by point.
Evidence by evidence. The years of leaked intelligence. The Busan connection. The orchestrated humiliation at the gala. The fact that Jun Seo had used company resources to surveil an employee and physically transport a woman and infant child against their will. Jun Seo, sitting at the far end of the table, did not move. His face drained of color in slow degrees, like watching a tide pull back from shore. Director Yoon, attending by video from Busan, disconnected the call halfway through Si-woo's presentation.
The screen went dark.
The board sat in ringing silence. As for my personal life, Si-woo continued, his voice dropping to the quiet register that Adiz had learned was his most dangerous. Miss Obi is my secretary. She has been, by every metric, the most competent and trustworthy employee this company has ever had. She is also the mother of a child she raised alone, without help, without support, because the world did not offer her any. She hid her daughter's existence out of justified fear. Fear that men like the one sitting at the end of this table would use a child as a weapon. He turned to Jun Seo. The eye contact between them lasted 5 seconds. Nobody breathed. You used a child as a weapon, Si-woo said. In my family's house. At my table. Jun Seo spoke for the first time. His voice was thin. Everything I did was for the good of the company. Everything you did was for yourself. Si-woo straightened. Your access to this building and all company systems is terminated effective immediately. Your employment is terminated. Security will escort you from the premises. He looked at the board. If there are any further questions about my judgment, my leadership, or the people I choose to have beside me, ask them now. No one spoke. Then we are adjourned. The aftermath unfolded over weeks. Jun Seo was escorted from Kong Tower that afternoon. He went quietly, his composure held until the lobby, where it broke in a single involuntary look back at the building he had spent his career inside. The look was not rage. It was bewilderment. The bewilderment of a man who had believed his own narrative so completely that its collapse felt like a violation of natural law. Director Yoon's motion was withdrawn. Without Jun Seo's inside intelligence, Yoon's position in every negotiation weakened. Within 3 months, the Busan Group's financial irregularities, exposed in part by documents Adiz had organized during the original port deal, would lead to a regulatory investigation of Yoon's own operations. The threat he represented to the Kong Empire dissolved not with a bang but with the slow, grinding inevitability of exposure. The media stories died. Si-woo's legal team issued precisely worded statements. The narrative shifted. The scandal became a personal matter. Then it became old news. Then it was forgotten entirely, buried under the next cycle of outrage and spectacle. But the private story, the real story, was quieter and more difficult. Adiz struggled. Not with the logistics. Those improved immediately once the secrecy was removed. Chidinma had a safe home. Blessing was offered a position within the household staff, which she accepted with the condition that she report to Adiz and no one else. The security detail was professional and unobtrusive. What Adiz struggled with was trust. She had spent so long surviving alone that accepting help felt like surrendering a part of herself she could not afford to lose. She caught herself flinching when Si-woo offered to watch Chidinma so she could sleep. She caught herself double-checking the locks on doors that she knew were already secure. She caught herself lying awake at night, listening for footsteps, waiting for the next crisis, the next betrayal, the next person who would offer love and deliver abandonment. Si-woo saw this. He did not push. He did not insist. He simply remained, steady, present, patient in a way that contradicted everything his reputation suggested. He learned Chidinma's routines. He learned that she liked mashed sweet potato but hated carrots. He learned that she slept best when someone hummed, not sang hummed, a low tuneless sound that vibrated through the chest of whoever held her. He learned that she called every man daddy indiscriminately, as Adiz had said, but that she reached for Si-woo with a specific insistent preference that neither of them could explain. One evening, Adiz found them in the living room. Si-woo was sitting on the floor, the man who ran an empire from the 62nd floor of a glass tower, with Chidinma in his lap, reading to her from a Korean children's book. He was translating the words into Igbo. His Igbo was terrible. Fractured and mispronounced and spoken with the concentrated seriousness of a man defusing a bomb. But he was trying. He had been studying. She saw the language app on his phone, the small notebook on his nightstand filled with vocabulary lists in his precise handwriting. Adiz leaned against the doorframe and watched them, and something inside her, the last fortified wall, the final barrier between her and the terrifying vulnerability of truly letting someone in, began to crack. "Your pronunciation is horrible," she said.
He looked up. Chidinma looked up.
Two pairs of dark eyes, one amused, one delighted. "I am aware," he said. "I have been informed by my teacher that my tonal accuracy is, and I quote, an offense to the ancestors." "Who is your teacher?" "A woman from the Nigerian community in Idiwan. She is very direct."
Adiz smiled.
It was the first real, unguarded smile she had given him, and he stared at it as though she had handed him something he had been searching for his entire life.
"Come sit," he said.
"Help me not offend your ancestors." She sat beside them on the floor. Chidinma immediately crawled from Siwoo's lap into hers, then back to Siwoo's, then back to hers, unable to choose. They read the book together. Adiz corrected his pronunciation. Their shoulders touched. Chidinma fell asleep between them, one hand on Adiz's arm and the other clutching Siwoo's thumb. In the quiet that followed, Siwoo spoke.
"The tattoo," he said.
"You asked who it was for."
She nodded.
"My mother was half Korean, half Ghanaian. She never spoke about her African heritage publicly. My father's family forbade it. She was expected to be Korean."
"Only Korean."
She complied, because she had no power to do otherwise.
He paused.
"She died when I was 2. I was raised by my father's people. I did not learn the truth about her until I was 19 and found her personal journals in a storage room they had forgotten to clear."
Adiz's breath caught. "She wrote in Chui," he continued.
Her journal entries, the private ones, the ones she never showed anyone, were in her mother's language. She wrote about feeling erased. About watching herself disappear into someone else's story.
His voice roughened.
"I got the tattoo the week after I read those journals."
The Dwenaman.
The symbol she drew in the margins of every page. Humility and strength. The willingness to fight and the wisdom to know when to stop.
He looked at his wrist.
The dark lines of the tattoo caught the lamplight. "I swore I would never erase anyone the way she was erased. I swore I would never let someone I loved become invisible." Adiz could not speak. She reached out and placed her hand over the tattoo, her palm flat against his wrist, her dark skin against the ink that honored a woman who had been half African in a world that had demanded she forget it.
"You kept your promise," she whispered. "Tonight. In that boardroom. You kept it."
He turned his hand over and laced his fingers through hers. "I will keep it every day," he said. "For as long as you let me." The conversation they had been postponing since Busan happened that night, after Chidinma was asleep. They sat on the terrace of the Hanamdong residence, the city spread below them, the September air carrying the first cool breath of autumn. "I cannot be your secretary anymore," Adiz said.
"I know. I will not be a kept woman.
I will not be the scandal they write about. I will not be the weakness they exploit." "You were never a weakness."
"In their eyes."
"Their eyes are not the ones I care about."
She looked at him.
His profile against the city lights was sharp, precise, beautiful in the way that dangerous things are beautiful.
"Then what am I?" she asked. "In your eyes." He turned to face her.
He reached up and, with exquisite care, touched the gold earring at her left ear, her mother's earring, the one she had worn the night everything changed. "You are the woman I want to build something with," he said. "Not an arrangement.
Not a performance.
Something real. A life that has room for a child who calls me daddy and a woman who challenges me in languages I am still learning to speak." She laughed, a wet, broken, beautiful sound. "You are asking me to trust you," she said.
"Yes."
"After everything."
"Yes."
"That is the hardest thing you could ask."
"I know."
He held her gaze with the steady intensity that she had learned was not coldness but commitment. "I am not asking you to trust me today. I am asking you to let me earn it.
Every day.
For as long as it takes." She looked at him for a long time. She saw the boy who had lost his mother at 2. The man who had found her journals at 19. The leader who had held a stranger's child against his shoulder in front of 300 people and refused to flinch. The person who had sat on the floor and tried to learn Igbo because a little girl deserved to hear her mother's language.
"Every day," she repeated. "Every day."
She leaned forward and kissed him. It was not a passionate kiss. It was not desperate or dramatic. It was slow, deliberate, precise, the way he did everything. His hand came up to cup her jaw, his thumb resting against her cheek, and she felt the tattoo's raised edges against her skin. She kissed him like a woman who was choosing, for the first time in her life, to stop surviving and start living. When they pulled apart, his forehead rested against hers.
"Every day," he whispered. "Every day," she said.
The city breathed below them. The autumn air moved through the garden. And somewhere inside the house, A little girl slept peacefully in a crib that a man she called Daddy had chosen for her. The blanket soft, the room warm, the doors locked, and every light left on. 6 months later, on a Sunday afternoon in March, the cherry blossoms along the Han River were finally, perfectly in bloom. Si Woo and Adiz stood in the private garden of the Hanamdong residence, surrounded by a small circle of witnesses. Blessing Kwan, the Igbo teacher from Itaewon, 2 of Adiz's university friends who had flown in from London, and Si Woo's maternal grandmother, a 91-year-old Ghanaian Korean woman named Nana Ya who had been located, after decades, through the journals of a daughter she thought she had lost forever. Nana Ya held Chidinma throughout the ceremony. The child wore a white dress with gold trim. She did not cry. She watched everything with her wide, serious eyes, one hand tangled in her great-grandmother's silver hair. The officiant was a judge, not Judge Han from the prosecutor's office, but a family court judge who owed Si Woo nothing and who performed the ceremony with genuine warmth. The vows were spoken in 3 languages, Korean, English, and Igbo.
Si Woo wore a charcoal suit. The tattoo was visible.
He had added nothing to it since the day he got it at 19. He had never needed to. The symbol had always meant what it meant, humility and strength, the willingness to fight and the wisdom to know when to stop. He had simply, finally, found someone worth stopping for. Adiz wore her mother's earrings and a dress the color of ivory, and when she said, "I do," her voice did not shake. It was clear and strong and certain, the voice of a woman who had crossed oceans and survived betrayals and raised a child alone in a foreign city and emerged, not unbroken. That was a myth she no longer believed in, but undefeated. After the ceremony, Si Woo lifted Chidinma from Nana Ya's arms. The child looked at him with a total trust that had started everything and said the word that, 14 months earlier, had detonated a boardroom, collapsed a conspiracy, and forced 2 people who were desperately in love to stop pretending they were not.
"Daddy," she said.
Si Woo looked at his daughter, because that is what she was now, legally and irrevocably and in every way that mattered, and he smiled. Not the ghost of a smile. Not the controlled, careful almost smile he showed the world.
A real smile.
Wide and open and devastating. The smile of a man who had been given the thing he never thought he deserved, and who intended to spend every remaining day of his life proving worthy of it.
"Yes," he said.
"I am right here." Adiz watched them, her daughter and her husband, framed by cherry blossoms and spring light, and she let herself feel it. All of it. The grief and the joy and the fear and the love, braided together into something that was not perfect but was honest. Something that was not a fairy tale but was, at last, real.
She reached for his hand.
He gave it without looking, an instinct now, an automatic gesture, as natural as breathing. Their fingers interlaced.
The tattoo pressed against her palm. Every day, she thought. Every day.
Thank you for staying with me through this story. If you enjoyed this Afro-Korean story, please like, share, and subscribe. Comment the location where you are watching from. And don't forget to hit the bell for more stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Until next time, stay safe, stay loved, and never give up on your happily ever after.